Located. Yes, this meeting will be recorded. So welcome to Managing Power Dynamics in Coalitions with the Community Health Training Institute, which is funded by Health Resources in Action and the Department of Public Health. So this funding allows us to bring you free trainings all year round. We are coming up against the end of our training year, so we've got 2 more trainings scheduled after this one, and you can learn more about CHTI and all the rest of our free trainings on the website HRIAinstitute.org. And that website is also where you can find the only coalition roster for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So if you're the leader of a coalition, we'd love for you to add your information to that roster or update your information if it's already there. And on that website, HRIAinstitute.org, you can also sign up for our newsletter, which is full of information and resources and all of our future trainings. So before we get started, let me just introduce other members of the team. We've got Jasper here. Jasper and Tanayo, you all want to say hi?
Yeah, hi, nice to meet y'all. My name's Jasper. I use they, them pronouns. I have the beauty and privilege of being able to work with Lauren and Eli and Tanayo on our team, along with our wonderful sort of ecosystem of trainers such as Winston, but I'll pass it off to Tanayo.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tanayo Crow, she, her pronouns. I've been on this team for almost 5 years. I'm a program associate with CHTI, and I also recognize a few of you, I think, from other training spaces. Not to be creepy, but I was like, oh, hey, I think I know that person. Anyway, very excited to be here today and just, yeah, again, part of the support team. So let us know if you have any issues.
Thank you, Tanayo. So I'm going to pass it over to Eli, who's running tech for us today.
Awesome. Thanks, Lauren. Good morning, everyone. Happy Tuesday. My name is Eli Adler-Cohen. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I am an administrative coordinator here at Health Resources in Action. Also lucky and fortunate enough to assist with my awesome CHTI team members. And yeah, I'm going to be helping out with tech today. So if anyone's running into any Zoom issues or computer problems, feel free to send me a message via the chat and I'm sure we can work through it. But yeah, stoked to be here and welcome. I'll pass it back to my trainers.
Thanks, Eli. And Winston, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, Winston Daly. I'll be co-facilitating with Lauren today. I use he, him pronouns. Also a senior trainer here at HRIA. Been with the organization about 7 months, but I've been in the training facilitation space about 8 years now. So happy to be here. It's my first foray with CHTI, but happy to be with you all and hopefully having a good conversation. Lauren?
All right, thanks, Winston. And like I said, my name is Lauren Bard. I'm also a senior training manager here at Health Resources in Action, and I've been on the CHTI team for about a year. I am a lifelong, career-long youth worker and social worker, and so you'll find me in a lot of those training spaces, but I've been in the training and capacity building space for many years, like Winston. So I'm happy to be here with you all today, looking forward to what we're going to build together because Winston and I will not be doing all of the talking. We're hoping to bring in all of your rich experience in this space as well. So before we get too deep into it, we'll do a little Zoom 101 overview. So as you can see, you found the mute button. Looks like most folks are on mute. We'd love for folks to be on mute if you're not sharing, just so we can minimize background noise, but we will be inviting you into the space to share. So coming off mute and sharing your voice in the space, you can use the raise hand function if you want us to call on you. That works really well. We invite all kinds of participation, including in the chat, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen. In the middle, there's a little chat icon. You can type in there to everyone. And then you've got the reactions button. So you can always just, show you're following along or agreeing or excited about something by throwing up a reaction. We love all kinds of participation. We also love to see folks when possible. There is a stop video, start video button. And so especially when you're in breakout rooms, being on camera is great. You get to connect with your colleagues from around the state and put faces with names. So to whatever extent possible that you're able to be on camera, we invite you to be on camera with us. But we know that due to bandwidth issues or whatever's going on in the background, you might not be able to. So that is okay too. If you need to call in and join by phone, when you go and scroll over near your mute button, there's that little caret pointing up, and you can select switch to phone audio, and it'll give you a number to dial in. Then you can merge your phone and your camera so that you're not relying on your Wi-Fi bandwidth if it's not working out very well. So that's a little tip on joining by phone if you need to do that. And oh, my favorite is this toggle button. I think everybody has this in the middle between the PowerPoint and the faces. You can like drag it to the left so you see more faces if you want to see your colleagues on the call as well. So I enjoy doing that so I can see more of you while we are training. And that's okay. If you don't have a camera, that's quite all right. You can use those reactions. You can participate by voice, by chat. We welcome all of it. Anything tech-wise that I missed that we should mention, Eli or Winston? We will use a couple other functions, but we'll talk about those when the time comes. So getting into the agenda for the day, we're going to do welcome and introductions. We're going to talk about your coalitions, define power, expressions and representations of power, and then some strategies for using power. And then we will wrap up at or before 2 o'clock today. We will have a break in there as well. And our learning objectives for the day are to define power and explore your role, the role of power in your work, identify ways in which power influences your relationships and experiences within the communities you work, and identify at least 2 strategies for leveraging your power positively in your community work. So hopefully that's what you're here for. The next slide is group agreements. These are just some suggested agreements for our time together. If you're able to leave your camera on, we love that. We want to support confidentiality in this space so that folks can share freely. So what you learn here, it can leave here, but what you hear here should stay here. So take the lesson, leave the details. The next one is take space, make space. So this is just in an effort to hear as many voices as possible. If you're someone who tends to lay back and just listen, we'd love to hear you take some space and share your experience. And then if you're somebody who is, some folks don't need as much time to process and they're ready to share or react right away, they may need to make some space for others once they've shared a bit. Please respect yourself and others, and that means taking a break when you need to, having a snack when you need to, whatever it is you need to do. And then we want to respect others by, listening to the opinions and respecting opinions. But we do have this oops and ouch function. So if you say something in the main space or in a breakout space and you're like, "Ooh, I didn't mean it that way," or "that might come off wrong," or "I said something," you can say oops and sort of rephrase and, pick that back up. If someone says something and you're like, "Ooh, that doesn't land with me," you can say ouch, and that will signal to them that they need to think again, or maybe opens a conversation about why what was said didn't land. So this is very much considering intention, but taking care of impact on what we say. Are there any other agreements that folks want to bring into the space? And I'm noticing in the chat, some folks need to leave a little bit early. That's quite all right. You should have received the slides in your email this morning. And yes, this is being recorded, so the recording will be shared afterwards. I believe it will go up on our library, our website as well. Fantastic. So if this sounds like some agreements that we can ride with today, I'd love to see a reaction from folks. It could be like your actual thumb on the screen. It could be a thumbs up emoji. It could be agree in the chat. Just some way of letting us know that you've seen these agreements. You think they're going to work for today. Seeing lots of virtual thumbs. Love that. Fantastic. All right, well, now you get a chance to do a little networking with your colleagues. We're going to break you out into breakout rooms so you get a chance to see who all else is here, connect. We would love to invite you to share your name, share your pronouns if you wish. I use she, her pronouns. They're displayed on my Zoom screen. And then you can chat about your organization, coalition, job title, community, location, all of these things that you're bringing into the space. And then you just mentioned something you enjoy doing outside of work. It's spring. I'm sure folks are getting, dusting off that pollen and getting outside. So you share something like that. So we're going to break you out into groups of about 4 or 5 people. You'll be there for 10 minutes to do some introductions. And if we could drop this prompt into the chat box, that would be great. I can do that right now. While Eli is making some breakout rooms. Any questions? If not, go forth into breakouts. Love that. All right, we're recording again. We're back from our breakouts. Let's just jump into the next slide number 9, Eli. Thinking about, because you all get to share with each other what communities you're working in, what your role is, and what coalitions you are a part of. And now we want to know, we want to know what coalition you're part of and why does it exist? And if you're not part of a coalition, maybe you're part of one of these other descriptors on the screen. So since Winston and I weren't in those rooms with you, it's our chance. And I'm seeing in the chat, this is Leah Artiaga, and I am in Roslindale, Leah. I know all about the Roslindale Food Collective. So thank you so much for the work you do in our community. I was just thinking, I've got these paper bags with handles. I need to clean them out and get them to the Food Collective.
We need them.
I
We need
know.
them badly.
I know. And so Leah shares in the breakout that the Neighborhood Food Action Collaborative. Oh, you were sharing the email. Well, I know why your coalition exists. It exists to feed your neighbors.
Exactly. But in addition to the Roslindale Food Collective, that's my little tiny piece. I am a community leader for NFAC, which is the Neighborhood Food Action Collaborative. This is a much bigger initiative. It comes from Health Leads, who's been our fiscal sponsor and who basically has done an amazing job at uniting community members from Roslindale, Hyde Park, Mattapan, Dorchester, and Roxbury, and getting them together and really focusing on how can we be a part of the solution to get good, healthy produce and culturally relevant, culturally appropriate food into the homes of people who need it most without asking for identification, because comida es un derecho humano, that food is a basic human right. And who are we to ask for identification? No, we just want to help people in need and mutual aid. We believe in supporting our neighbors. So if you're going to come work, fill a box, take it home, enjoy. So NFAC is an amazing organization, and I'm so proud to be a community leader and in this organization, because we are getting our hands dirty in the trenches and getting to know one another in the communities and building relationships. It's good stuff.
Love that. Thank you, Leah. And I love how you listed up a power differential in the model, which is identification. Folks needing ID or like sort of regulating or gatekeeping ID. So that is the power differential that you are actively trying to dismantle. So thank you.
On 2 sides, because I have lived experience, because at one point in 2009, my husband was deported and I was a single mom of 3 kids and my boss retired and I was on unemployment. So here I was, this white college educated woman walking up to these food pantries, and the stigma that I felt. There's 2 sides of this coin, right? There's also BIPOC people, there are marginalized people, and they have a different experience, but there's an experience on both ends when it comes to food insecurity. And so we want to address it on both angles, right? So to say to everybody, thank you for coming, even for the people who feel embarrassed, they're like, should I be here? I own a home. Yes, you should be here. We're here to support anybody who has a need. So it's amazing. And I'm happy to be a part, but I was in a breakout when we were trying to connect and then we got scooped out.
Okay.
Sorry to commandeer your meeting.
No, I'm so glad that you did put your name in the chat, because it's not the name that shows up on your screen. So that's great. I'm seeing Linda shared. Linda is the shared service coordinator for the Public Health Excellent Grant in Kingston, Plymouth, Duxbury, Wareham, Plimpton, and Carver. And that is direct, like basically equity in public health, right? Specifically like racial equity in public health, if I'm not mistaken, Linda. Anne Marie shares emergency preparedness. Okay, that's another reason for coalitions to exist, emergency preparedness. So 24 cities and towns helping with public health preparedness, Public Health Excellence Alliance for shared services to expand public health services across 6 cities and towns. Beautiful. So we've got racial equity as a reason, we've got food access as a reason, we've got emergency preparedness as a reason, preventing youth drug use as a reason for coalition to exist. Page with the Verge Impact Partners. Not quite a coalition, but facilitation, roadmap strategies for coalitions, beautiful. So supporting coalitions, recently worked in the Mass Coalition for Racial Equity in Housing, fantastic. Substance abuse prevention and promotion of mental health among the youth in Milton from Margaret. Thank you for sharing that. Y'all can come off mute. I don't have to be the one, but I'm happy to. The mission of the Hampshire County Food Policy Council is cultivate shared governance and countywide network that builds the power of community voice to make food policies more equitable, honor diverse cultures, help local food economies to flourish. Fantastic, Caitlin. Thanks for sharing that.
I can share a little bit. My name's Sierra. I'm from the Charlestown Coalition. It was initially created to combat substance use and work a little bit on prevention. At one point, the 1 square mile of Charlestown, which is a neighborhood of Boston. A lot of people think it's not part of Boston. We had the highest fatal overdose rate in this 1 square mile throughout the entire state of Massachusetts. So that's why the coalition started, and it has morphed a little bit to addressing social determinants of need in the community and really just getting basic needs met.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing that, Sierra.
I'm going to jump in and just share something real quickly about the Public Health Excellence Grant Program. I am Mike Hugo. I am the Policy and Government Affairs Director for the Mass Association of Health Boards, and we are the legal and legal technical assistance provider for the 351 separate boards of health in Massachusetts. The Public Health Excellence Grant Program is a program that is combining as many of those public health departments and boards of health across the state as we can. We have 51 sharing groups right now that we've established, and we have 323 cities and towns participating. A great example. I'm actually, in addition to that, just so I could keep my finger in it and know what's happening, I'm the shared services coordinator for the islands, for their shared services group. And something that'll interest, I think, most folks in this panel is that we're one of the oldest. We were one of the original grant groups, and we're pretty far along. And one of the things we've tackled is that 2 summers ago, 3 campers in Chilmark thought it would be kind of cool. 3 white campers thought it would be kind of cool to put a noose around a black camper's neck and tie him to a goalpost on the soccer field. And the camp's total reaction was, "Hey, that's not cool. You shouldn't do that," which is not the right reaction to have when something like that happens. So we took some of our grant money and we did an anti-racism training last summer for all camp directors and counselors before they could open. And this summer, as a result of that, in order for a camp to open, boards of health, by the way, have to certify every summer camp in their city and town before they can open. And on the islands, in order to open your camp, you have to check off a box that says we have an anti-racism program in place. So that's a good example of how the grant is looking at the social equity and the racial equity issues. And if you don't think that there's issues involving equity on the islands, you're not understanding the fact that they have 180 homeless people that live in their cars on Martha's Vineyard year round. And most of them are people of color who work in the restaurants when they're open, and when they're not, unfortunately, a lot of them resort to drugs and to other wrong direction things. So we're trying to work on that the best we can on the islands.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks for sharing about those shared service agreements and the work going on across the Commonwealth. very much fits right into our theme of coalitions have a purpose, they've got a reason to exist. We have to ask ourselves these questions. It's also helpful for us to hear who all is here. I want to just lift up a couple other things that were dropped in the chat: substance abuse prevention, breaking down silos and stigma to care for individuals, the Jamaica Plain Community Connections Coalition, my neighbor, thank you. Additional support for 6 towns. Yeah. So we're starting off this whole session together about power dynamics by asking ourselves, why does the coalition exist? And so do folks have thoughts or reflections on why we would ask that question if we're here to talk about power dynamics? Any reflection on that? You want to drop in the chat or come off mute?
I'll try to take a somewhat of a stab at this. My name's Christine, everyone. I'm on the state's Rehabilitation Council. It's all about how the state applies the Rehabilitation Act to mass rehab services. I'm a consumer of mass rehab services as a disabled person. I'm in recovery. I have autism and ADHD and PTSD. And I think coalitions are supposed to exist to give people who have not had power some power, and to teach them that they are worth investing in. Sorry for my dog. Yeah, to teach people that they are worth investing in and that you can say powerful things and make a difference. But it doesn't really pan out that way in actual organizations and on actual bodies, because power dynamics and kind of groupthink make it really hard for any outsider or anyone to kind of question how things are done. So it ends up actually being hypocritical and going against what we think needs to happen.
Thank you so much, Christine. I see a lot of heads nodding, a lot of acknowledgement. Don't ever apologize for your dog. But I think you nailed it. I mean, coalitions exist to bring in the voice of the people, right? Power to the people. And you did lift up some of the challenges along with that. Appreciate that. This is me making space in case there's other voices that want to come into the space before I hand it over to Winston.
I like to share. I think one of the most important things also that coalitions help with is for other partners in a certain community to avoid working in silos, right? So there are a lot of partners. We are there working, recreating the wheel sometimes when it's not needed. So I think a coalition well managed will bring that power of using our energy where it needs to be used versus everybody working in a spiral, you know, and not accomplishing really the ultimate goal that is serving populations, right? Whatever it is. But, you know, so if we spend too much time and thinking and the admin, whoever needs that food or that service is missing because people behind the screen are like cannot get over something. So a coalition, you know, brings us all together and make things move smoother and faster, bringing that food to the table or that service that needs to be addressed in a more appropriate way.
Yeah, thank you. I love that. We're more powerful together. We're more than the sum of our parts when we work together. Appreciate that. Paige, you can get your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think this is a great question for coalitions to also reflect and ask on occasion or like on a frequent basis, so that everybody who's a part of the coalition is still all on the same page, right? So you can continue to make sure that you're moving in the same direction and have the same goals.
Yes, thank you. Appreciate that. And for modeling the raise hand function, Anne Marie found it as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that for us, our coalition, I think it gives everybody the opportunity to have a voice. We find a lot, and when we're talking about silos and stuff, but we have a lot of committees in the area, and it doesn't really give workers at every level the opportunity to share their knowledge. It's usually just your upper level executive voices that you're hearing. So in the recovery field, we're not always including those voices of recovery. We're not always including the people that are out on the street doing the work, talking to the people that are actually struggling. We're only looking at it from an executive level. And I think that does a disservice to everybody. So for us, our coalition, it's really important for our entire group to allow everybody the space to be heard, regardless of what their job is or regardless of what their title or their education is, that everybody has knowledge that should be shared and taken into consideration.
Yes, thank you, Anne Marie. Nothing about us without us, right? The folks who have lived experience or are most affected need to be at the table. So appreciate that. Rosa, your hand's going up, it's coming down, it's going up.
I wasn't sure because I'm sharing the same sentiments as others that have shared online, but I wanted to just add a little bit more about, it's more about uplifting and building our communities. So when people have a voice at the table, we can validate more their lived experience, and instead of just having a coalition with several outcomes, but really the impact is what's important. And so when we start to validate and hear others people's voices, especially marginalized communities that never have a chance to speak up. And when we talk about these spaces, we talk about equity. So if we're going to be equitable, we need to give those I like brave space. I've heard that in a trauma-informed training versus safe space. And so just allowing people that we need those perspectives to move forward and really build power in our communities.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. People don't know how powerful they are, and we need to make that invisible power visible. And we're going to talk more about that in just a few. I can already tell this is going to be a great time together because I love the participation that we're getting, people jumping off mute. Feel free to introduce your coalition or where you're from before you speak. That way we can continue to make those connections. So appreciate you all. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Winston. Let's take us to the
Thank you, Lauren. And thank you, everyone. Those are really great points about coalitions, why they're built, and also the point of having to ask yourself these questions on, a steady basis of why are we here? Are we moving towards our mission, and how are we moving towards that mission? And so before we're going deeper into power, let's, enter the space with a bit of a definition. What is power? Let's have some shared language and an interpretation of what does that mean. So what is power? And a couple of definitions that we use or frameworks around thinking about it is one, this definition here. Power can be defined as a degree of control over material, human, intellectual, and financial resources exercised by different sections of society. The control of these resources becomes a source of individual and social power. That comes from Van Cleason and Miller of the nonprofit online news journal. And the second one that we add in, because it really frames it well, is power is dynamic, relational, and multidimensional, changing according to context, circumstance, and interests. Its expressions and forms can range from domination and resistance to collaboration and transformation. And that's from the folks at Making Change Happen. So I want to ask folks, and Eli, you can leave this slide up. Does anything stand out to you in these definitions of power? Any words, any phrases here that stand out to you particularly? And is your understanding of power similar or different to these definitions?
I'd like to share if that's possible. This is Tiana Lawrence, she, her from Mel King Institute, and I do some work with residents across the state doing leadership development, particularly with residents of public and CDC, so community development housing. And one thing that stood out to me was definitely the control over the intellectual resources, exercised by people, and just thinking about the misinformation given to people, like, withholding knowledge and information, and therefore it truly impacts someone's ability to advocate for themselves, stand up for themselves. And that's something that I see very often that kind of interconnects with this financial control, right? Not having the specific knowledge necessary to navigate your situation is extremely harmful. And so that really resonated with me in that sense.
Yeah, thank you, Tiana. Great point. The idea of withholding information, speaking specifically about financial resources, not providing folks the proper resources. Go ahead, Christine.
These are exceptional quotes. These are very interesting to me. I have ADHD, so whenever I read about a concept, it just connects my brain. It's like thinking in concentric circles, just in an impossible amount of magnitude. So what these quotes made me think of was a quote from Huey P. Newton. And I looked it up real quick because I want to make sure that I quote it right. But he says that the ability to define phenomenon and the ability to make these phenomenon act in a desired manner, that is power. And at least for me, what the power source that I figured out how to understand and work within, even if it's oppressive as all hell, is the legal system. To get any funding that I've received through mass rehab, I had to look up the federal codes that dictate what mass rehab does. And as it turns right, I correctly interpreted those to give me the funding to rehabilitate. So this is very important stuff, that when you understand how oppressive society is, if you can work within those systems and take things to the legal route, you start to see where people do demand basic rights. You do see where people really stick up for what they need. But it's only if you have this knowledge.
No, I agree. I hear you, Christine. I hear the thoughts kind of coming out as they're going, thinking about this in terms of a framework, societal framework, in terms of, using knowledge, exercising your power. Where do you find it? How do you execute it? How do you empower other people? And I see your hand up, but I want to just lift up what Stephanie put in the chat here. Quote saying, I heard somewhere that a person who has power is one who is capable of making change for better or worse, aka decision makers. Absolutely, Stephanie. That's certainly one version of power. And one way to exercise it. Absolutely. Thank you. Anna, go ahead.
Hi, Anna with the Alston Brighton Health Collaborative, and very much carrying what Stephanie and Christine have said is to try to use just power as the Spanish interpretation, which is put there, the ability to act. And that I think, as I often think about it, kind of reframes who has power. Everybody has power. And it's rethinking in the situation what your power is and what your opportunities and your options are. It might be political power, it might be financial power, it might be social power in the form of social capital. Christine, using power in the legal system, right? Like, she exercised power, she exercised the ability to act. So often try to take it in that form instead of a less and also moving away from the word empower, as in not us giving power to people. Everyone has power, and so how do we source it, and what is it?
Thank you, Anna. Everyone has power, and I think even that framing about not giving power to people, but that people already have this power, right? In terms of how do they use it? How do they, and the keeping of knowledge, do folks know they have power and how to exercise that power? And I think when we talked about our coalitions, that's been brought up as far as why our coalitions exist in the communities that we work in. Anyone else, these definitions of power, does anything in the definitions resonate with you? Does anything connect particularly?
So Samila, I am in a bunch of different neighborhoods and places working with different organizations, but my grandmother, who didn't have an opportunity to, advance her studies, was very smart. But she used to say, every single one of us is a doctor in their own area, right? And so when working with teams and in leadership roles, I do believe that no one is above anyone else, because me without you and you without me, we cannot accomplish our goals. So I carry that along with me, everybody is a doctor in their own area. That's what I understand. My understanding of power is.
Thank you, Samila. Everyone is an expert in some field. I think before we move to the next piece, one word that always sticks with me in the second definition is power is dynamic. And I think of that as power changes sometimes depending on where you are. You may be at a different place of power in your home than you are in your workplace, in another place of power in your coalition and in your neighborhoods and in your community. And that dynamism where you see yourself as whereas the power that may be exerted upon you in different spaces. That's one piece I take away from this definition. Anyone else before we move to some more sort of frameworks around defining and really digging into
I will try to say some word of a power, though I will understand the word. The word for me will be the influence that someone will have over the way that he will act in a good way, that he will act over what he will control, either as this I put in the definition, either of a material, woman, or other people, or financial. But for me, power is good influence and control. This is the two words that I always associate with power.
Yeah, good influence and control. Hoping it's only good influence. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. All right, so let's do a little more definitions on what power is and how it's exerted, and where we can sort of put a little more framework. Why don't you jump to the next one, Eli? So there are these 7 power bases that we're going to talk about. These are types of power. So these were created by social scientists in the 1950s. They did studies about social change and the ability to make change and also exert influence in your communities and upon society. And these were the types of power that they found, the ways that folks can exert power or use power within their communities. They started with 5 and over time added 2 more to get us here to the 7. So what I want to do is just read these first and then go through some examples where each one that may show up in our work. Is there anyone who could read A for me? Coercive power.
Sure, I will.
Thank you, Lee.
A coercive power. Fear-based induces compliance because failure will lead to punishment.
Thank you. Fear-based power, coercive. Any examples of that we can think about in our coalitions, our work, or in other spaces? Fear-based power.
I mean, if you don't comply, you lose your job.
You lose your job, right? Firing. Christine says prison industrial complex. You don't comply, you go to jail. You think of laws that used to be on our books that are no longer on our books. Ezekiel, you will lose your funding if you don't get the form in on time. Absolutely. The people that write checks certainly exert some forms of power. Thank you. Can anyone read B, connection power?
I can do that, Winston.
Thank you, Margaret.
Connection power based on connections with influential, important people in or outside the organization. Induces compliance because it could lead to gaining favor or avoiding consequences.
Thank you, Margaret. Any examples we could think of that, the connection power?
I have a question about that one. Is that sort of the phrase of it's like who you know? Is it a matter of like being connected to the right person to kind of get your way? Is that in the same realm or no?
Yeah, I think so. I think it can be. Yeah, it's sometimes, you know, as you said, it's not what you know, it's who you know, right?
Networking.
Networking.
Or
people you-
bribery, one or the other.
people you went to school with, people you may have grown up with. Is equal enticing to join your coalition because you're state rep or state senator in the coalition? Absolutely. And Marie saying political influence. One thing Caitlin's introduced, which I think we can talk about as well. Caitlin's saying so that a lot of these definitions feel like you have a negative connotation, and she feels that power can also be framed positively. Any thoughts on that? Thank you for that, Caitlin.
Yeah, I just want to speak to that again. I appreciate that comment that, of course, it can be positive or negative. I'm just thinking about not how I want to influence power, but how the reality might be in some communities on how things change is, again, sort of who you know, and these backdoor decisions and conversations and support, and of course, lobbyists. Let's not even get into that, but yeah.
Yeah, certainly. And I think to the point that Caitlin put in the chat, I think all of these have both sides. There's the good version of all of these, and then there's the negative. I think with all things, there's a good version in connection power where you may be connected with folks that have a certain level of power. You can get something really good done for your community, right? It can be that you are particularly great at advocacy because you are able to gather a lot of people because you grew up in the neighborhood with people who are influential and important within that neighborhood, and you're able to build a coalition of those people because of your connections.
Yeah, I cheated because I skipped ahead because you sent the slide ahead of time. But but yeah, I know that there's like other frameworks around power coming up, and I think about sort of like the power to or the power within, or you know, these ideas around power that, like, I don't know, I just feel like power can be morally neutral, and it's just sort of what you use that power to do that makes the difference.
Yeah, power can be neutral and it's based on your execution of it. Can be. Grab some things from the chat. Anna says, agree with Caitlin. The language used here is geared negative, not neutral. Compliance induced need. Okay, thank you, Anna. And Marie, we're the state rep to help increase funding for public health to purchase flu vaccines during the flu pandemic, H1N1. Thank you. Thank you, Anna. So let's I'd like to hear a little bit of feedback on Anna's point. Do others feel that that the language or the frameworks or the definitions are geared negatively and not neutrally?
I think if I'm going off of my gut reaction to what power is, just in my being a person of recovery, being a person who's experienced significant violence and a host of bad things, like my brain immediately associates power with bad, negative things. Bad, negative things, and I've never really seen them broken down into these more mini concepts. And what is deeply fascinating to my brain is that people can have a version of, can have a form of power, but not have it in the right space to make it actually real and manifest into something that is a positive change. Like, I've always found it's really troubling seeing how many smart, good ideas get shot down, even if the person has expert power, if they're not in a legitimate power sphere. And that effect is going to get progressively worse, disproportionately worse, depending on how close you are to kind of falling in line with white supremacy culture and the status quo. So this is deeply fascinating to me. I really like this breakdown. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you, Christine. Christine brings in a larger piece of power, talking about white supremacy culture, right? Something that is draped over so much more than just our communities or, you know, or one coalition. I hope I'm saying this right. Saidi?
Saidi, that was very close. Thanks. I think that I understand where it comes from, that it seems that there is a negative connotation to the definitions and the breakdown. And I also, at least for me, it comes up, I think part of what Christine was saying is what I'm interpreting it as is also how I relate to authority figures and how I depict that, which for me, it's a very complicated relationship that I just don't respond well when people try to exert their power on whatever I'm trying to do or whatever I'm trying to say in a non-justified way. So that is a kind of negative area of how I look at power. But if I'm trying to, but if someone is trying to help me with their power more often than not, then I probably would associate power with something more positive. So it can obviously go both ways. And then also in the way that I can express power, and that can also obviously change. And as long as you can use it the right way, then that's positive. But it's not to say that it cannot be used in the wrong way so that it would be negative. But yeah, just like everything is in a spectrum. So I also see that definitions also in the same way.
Thank you, Saidi. Thank you. Leah, go ahead.
It's interesting when I look at it. So me and my Pollyanna view of life, when I look at things, I look at things with glass half full, right? So I look at this for me, and my first reaction is, that there's going to be consequences in the first one. But in the second one, I look at that and I say, you know what? You have united, we stand, divided, we fall. So that connection power for me sings to me in like my whole hat when I'm in the world is connecting with people and making sure that relationships stay open and you build new relationships and new coalitions with other organizations, because united we stand. So when I look at it, I look at the other side of the coin for me.
Thank you, Leah. I want to bring a couple of things from the chat into the conversation. Ezekiel says compliance induced definitely gives me negative connotations. Caitlin saying I was using the word legitimate power feels really weird to me. Legitimate feels morally positive, but legitimate power can be used in a really dominating way. Thank you, Caitlin. Rosa, I see a big relationship between power and privilege. Absolutely. And Caitlin, yes, responding to that, authority feels like a more fitting word for this framework than power to me. Yes, this is also a very individualized framework. Is there a difference? Do we still find there's a difference between authority and power?
Yeah, I think so. Because it's like you can have like I have the power to get up in the morning and put my clothes on. I can do that. I have that power, but I don't have the, like, if I were to be like, everybody has to get up in the morning and put their clothes on, that's authority.
Okay. Okay.
Like there's the difference between, like, we all have power to do a lot of different things. And it's more like, I think authority is like telling other people what they should be doing.
So power, you're thinking of power as individual power to yourself, and then authority is more over a lot of other people.
That's how I think of it. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Caitlin. I'm just going to read a couple of these just to sort of keep us on pace here. Expert power, influence based on possessing expertise, skill, knowledge. Some of that is like, as we said, knowing a neighborhood you grew up in, being an expert around that, or you may have a skill as a carpenter or a doctor, as we said a second ago. Information power, access based, which we brought up, influence due to others' need for information or a desire to be in on things. We talked about keeping information away from folks or providing or helping people find information. Legitimate power, that being position based, that's compliance induced by virtue of the position within an organization and the expectation that their suggestions will be followed. That can be your manager, your director, anything that comes with your sort of title or position within a particular community. Referent power, based on personal traits, influence due to attractiveness or worthiness. And in that, we think of perhaps influencers, politicians, sometimes a cult leader. And then reward power, that being incentive-based, and that's compliance induced by the belief that rewards such as pay, promotion, or recognition can be gained. So taking this and then and putting it into sort of execution. On our next slide, we're going to look at a couple images. These are 4. On the top left there, you see a group of kids and what appears to be a teacher, a gentleman, maybe an officer with a firearm, the bottom left, the gentleman in the car, and then a group in the right. So let's start with the one in the top left with the young people. What kinds of power do you see in that image? And these questions to the right, what's the impact of that form of power? What's the source of the power? And what role could the identity of the people in the image play in that execution of power? Lauren's dropped the list of forms of power in the chat. Let's see who's raised their hand here. Saidi, go ahead.
From what I can see, I think one of the according to the power definitions we just went through, that I guess the teacher might be holding is holding is information power. She definitely has the information, or they have the information that they want to provide to the younger kids, and they have their access to that information depends on the teacher.
One of the first places we see power exceeded, right, in the classroom is young people. Ezekiel.
Yeah, lots of different kinds. I think the legitimate power, the teacher has a position, and the others need to follow her because she's in sort of this higher position as the teacher-student dynamic. Coercive power, potentially she could punish the students if they don't listen to her or follow her. And then I think there's certainly an identity aspect with age. The young people are disempowered and disenfranchised. They're not given their agency or space to take up their power a lot of the time.
Yeah, thank you, Ezekiel. Bringing an identity, right? Yeah, age, certainly part of our identity. Young children in school do not have the power of that. Teachers do, and they're certainly exerted within the classroom. Other folks. Go ahead, Paige.
Yeah, I think the only other one that I'm currently identifying that hasn't been said is maybe expert power, right? Teachers are at the head of the class because they're the experts, they're teaching, right?
Thank you, Paige. What do we think about sort of the setting, the housing, the dwelling behind is certainly intentional, right? Does that change our idea around identity, around who the teacher may be, what the students may be? You know, I think sort of the setting gives a little bit of the connotation of a little bit of colonialism, of folks wanting to come and teach with a dominant culture. I see something in the chat here that I want to talk about. Christine, school is complicated for kids. If there's learning disabilities, no accommodations offered, kids can internalize that and feel powerless. Thank you, Christine. The second image, let's say gentleman with the firearm. What are we thinking here in terms of power, sources of power, and identity?
Well, I see coercive power. It's him holding that gun.
Thank you, Christine says military industrial complex, coercive power, certainly. Anything else?
I think I see referent power, just looking at his the way he's dressed, it's very intimidating. I guess with his identity being the leadership and personality as holding a gun and all of that could be very intimidating and influential.
Yes, thank you, Miriam.
I'll jump in on this one because I feel like I see all 7 different types of power in this one, and in different ways. And I probably could go on and on about that, but I don't know if everybody else agrees with that.
Yeah, I could see that, right? And a lot of this, to the point that I think we were all making in our conversation, and some of this will be your own interpretation of this power. Your experience with law enforcement or people in power with firearms certainly can dictate how you see power here, right? The power of position, the power of a weapon, the uniform, which I think we've mentioned in the chat. a bit. I want to read what folks put. Legitimate power, uniform suggests role with power over others. Yes. Rosa referencing the first picture, thought what that the teacher was holding was tools, was reference to power, right? The teacher holding a globe and a book. We're talking about information and that power in terms of sharing information. Ezekiel, we call this position power, call this position power rather than legitimate power. Thank you. How about that third image in the bottom left corner? Well, what do we see? We can talk through what we see, right?
I'm going to assume this politician is a white guy getting a lot of money from who I'm seeing as wealthy, rich donors, wealthy, rich people to fund a campaign.
All right. Thank you, Christine. Christine, what makes you say politician?
We got a suit. We got, I don't know. It's just, well, it could be celebrity, I guess, but I don't know. Again, this is why we have these discussions.
Yeah.
It could be a different authority figure or influential person.
Anna also says her first reaction was politician.
Yeah.
And Marie saying reward power, bribery. Thank you. Anyone else? I see.
Connection power. Probably I'm in politician as well, and I feel like this person has probably some kind of connections, and then also referent power, based on the way that people are kind of looking to this person for, like, I imagine that he's kind of attractive or desirable. He has this fancy car. He has this sort of like fancy suit. I feel like that's referent power.
Yeah, fancy car, fancy suits. Anything else? To me, the image almost looks like people are chasing the car, right? Bit of fame. And that it's the one image with a lot of smiles. Linda, yeah, it looks like the child has a phone taking your picture. Very relevant for our times. And the last one, let's start with this last one. What do we see in that image?
It might be people following a leader.
Thank you, Margaret. And organized power. Thank you. People following a leader. Peaceful protests. Christine. Power of the people. Anyone else? Shared power. Those children from the top left growing up. Thank you, Anna. That's a great connection. I'm seeing from folks that this image is giving sort of positive vibes. Can anyone speak to why? Power and love. Thank you, Rosa. Holding hands from Linda, hand holding. Yeah. Thank you, Meg, Linda. There's no one clear leader. People are united. Thank you, Chelsea. Power in the numbers of people. Thank you, Rosa. Connection power. Meg says a diverse group, children and adults. Thank you, Samila. Sense of belonging. I think that's a great point to see to see how the images impact folks differently, right? And I think one point that we've talked about that you all have shared is personal experience with power and what it means to folks, whereas a group of people holding hands and walking together has a much better connotation than, you know, an officer holding a firearm. Unity and family from Leah, population, connection power, unity, community, collaboration from Miriam. Ezekiel, what type of power is power in numbers induced by not wanting to feel like you're out of the group? Ezekiel, could you share more about that? Let me make sure I understand what you're saying. You're saying it's power in numbers, but it's more that you don't want to be excluded, that you want to be.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking about this image. To me, it feels like the part of how the power is used is there's a large group of people walking together. And so there might be a feeling that induces in other people of like, oh, I should be part of this group because they're like, but it doesn't feel like it fits neatly into any of these types of power because it's not, there's nothing in this that suggests to me that this group has really connection power, like that they're connected with influential and important individuals. It's more that they have this strength of numbers and community that people are sort of generating on in the chat. That's like that's very visceral to want to be a part of that. And I'm curious what type of power you would think of that as.
Anna's saying reward power, rewarded by being included. I think it again, it goes with sort of your own interpretation, which is why the images are just images, right? It's how do we receive it? And so it is perfectly okay to feel that seeing that group of people walking, it brings images of people who have worked together in community, folks who have organized for change, people who have organized for marches. And that's the impact, right? And that's it can be reward power. It can be referent power, right? I think the woman in the front, you see, she's the one person that has her head up. She's certainly the center of the picture, right? It can be folks who are following a charismatic leader for good or for sometimes not so good. So it really depends. It really is interpretive of how we see power and some of our previous connections to power and what speaks to the good in us. So it makes sense. All of us work in coalitions. So the idea of a group of folks gathering together and connecting has a positive connotation. Any others on this image? Thoughts? Inclusive and diversity. Thank you, Miriam. Yeah, I think seeing that in the young person that's in the front as well. So in this, power can be, we're seeing through this exercise, power can sometimes be difficult to analyze, right? And the fact that it's operates in different ways, some visible, some invisible. There are a lot of division, sort of dimensions of the power that are kind of critical to understanding and analyzing the problem, or even analyzing how do you build your coalition structure for your purpose, for your mission, and for the community that you're working with, right? So it's different when you're planning interventions, or really like evaluating the impact of your particular coalitions. And so earlier folks brought up some of those divisions of like hidden power, things that are much more difficult to kind of label or engage, since some power can be concealed. And it can also be embedded in old practices. White supremacy was brought up as a power structure. The idea of the water we swim in and what came before us, and that sort of ideas of power. And to that point, Lauren's going to take us through an exercise where we jump into the ideas of different dimensions of power and where we see it and how it's executed. Lauren?
All right, thank you, Winston. Thank you, everybody, for that discussion. That was very interesting to see how things come up, what people see, a lot up to interpretation. But we are going to talk a little bit about dimensions of power. And I alluded to this earlier based on some of y'all's participation in the earlier activity. On the next slide, we've got 3 dimensions of power. So we've got visible power, that power that we know somebody has power. It's observable decision-making. So we're talking about, a politician who's been elected. We're talking about a political party in power, or, the way a budget is laid out shows where the power is, shows what the priorities are. We've got bylaws. So this could be coalition leadership. It could be how decisions are made. We're talking about like race, gender, and class. So visible power. After we review these 3, we're going to go and break them each down. So I'm going to be asking you all to come up with examples for each one. So that's just a note, note to selves. So that visible power. Then you've got the hidden power. This is the setting the agenda, a little behind the scenes. So which community concerns are going to be the focus? How did they become the focus? I don't know. What identities and experiences are integrated into a strategy? So that hidden power. When I see the picture of that man in the car with the money, I think about funders, you know, and well, they could be very visible, but they could be anonymous funders that only some people know who they are, and that could be hidden power. And then there's invisible power. Invisible power shapes meanings. It's how individuals think about our place in the decision-making. And this is the impact, or can be the impact, of socialized roles and stereotypes. So this could be sort of feeling like I'm disempowered because there's all this invisible power that's holding me back. So I would love for folks to think about examples, and we're going to try this thing called the annotate function. We've had lots of folks coming off mute and sharing, and I love that, but I want to use a method of participation to invite other folks into the space who maybe are less comfortable coming off mute. And so I want to introduce you to the annotate function. If you scroll towards the top of your screen and click view options right next to where it says you're viewing Eli Adler-Cohen screen, view options will pop down a menu and you can select annotate off that list. And then that'll give you another menu. And on the second to the left, there's one called text. And if you click on text, you'll be able to drop a text box onto the screen and you can type on it and everybody can see it. So give it a try. Grab a text box, and if you can come up with an example of the visible power dimension. This is observable decision making. Someone found the draw option. That's great. Text will be easier to write words. And then you could always grab the stamp option. If someone writes something that you like, you can grab the stamp option and, you know, put a check mark next to it. So I would love, and you're also free to drop it in the chat or come off mute and we can type it on there for you. So whatever method of engagement works for you, feel free to drop it in the chat or come off mute or try that text feature and we'll get your thoughts onto the screen. A form of visible power, the Constitution. Yes, very visible. The folks who are tasked with upholding the Constitution, judges, the Supreme Court, very visible. Voting as a form of visible power. Yes, the police in uniform out there, very visible. Voting in elections, at coalition meetings, on board meetings. I'm thinking about who has visible power. Open meeting laws, rules, agendas have to be available, keeping it visible. Yeah, making it obvious. We know who is in charge, the employee handbook. It's observable decision making. Town leaders, select boards. Yeah, thank you. Other thoughts? Bosses. Leading meetings or facilitating. Yes. Hiring. Yeah, there's some visible power on the hiring committee. You know, you go for a job and you know exactly who is in charge of the decision. The school committee has visible power. Yes. Interesting that in many places it's an elected school committee. For a long time in Boston, we did not have an elected school committee, so that complicates the dimension of power there. All right. Town managers meeting, director of health, board of health. Love it. Where an office is located. Yes. State government centered in Boston, not accessible to western parts of the state. Yeah. Yep. So true. Visible power, observable decision-making, elections mentioned on there with voting. Love it. Looks like folks got the hang of that. And also feel free to come off mute if you want or drop it in the chat. But let's try the next one, hidden power. So this is where we're talking about setting the agenda. Oh, we need to clear, I'll clear these slides. There we go. So the next slide has hidden power. So this is the setting of the agenda. This is like which community concerns are the focus of policy. If folks can think of examples of that. Suits, ties, fancy clothes. That could be visible. That could be visible. It's right out there. Other thoughts of hidden power. That anonymous funder could be hidden power, or investors, that lobby money, yep, grant funders, funders, yeah. How the agenda is set, not subject to, what's OML?
Open meeting law.
Open meeting law.
Thank you, coalition votes. Only the published agenda is, yes. I think about like which census tract is voting the most or is lobbying their rep to get, the flight patterns out of Logan changed, or some other thing, some other, community issue that, folks who are making their voice heard, you might not know it walking through there, but on somebody's voicemail box, there's a lot of advocacy happening. Residents allowed to speak during public comments, part of the open municipal meetings, where their comments are often left hanging with no follow-up. Yeah. Hidden power. I mean, it's sort of visible when they mute your mic and move on, like, who did it. You know what I mean? Policies and procedures for backbones of an org for a coalition. Research papers published. Yeah, I mean, when it's funny, it's like hidden in plain sight, right? Like it's out there, folks can see it, but unless it's brought to my attention, I might not notice. I might not know, Who decides how roads are used? Use of public space. Yeah, I like how the mention of like the open meeting law, this is behind closed doors. There's power. We might have an idea that it's there, but how it's functioning is hidden. Caregivers to individuals with disabilities, hidden power. Yeah. Can't show up to town. Who can't show up to town meetings? Yeah. Working folks. If you're not offering food and childcare, how accessible is that space? So, which community concerns are the focus of policy? What identities and experiences are integrated into strategy? These are all great examples. Folks who are computer savvy, who can't Zoom into virtual meetings. Yeah. And before lots of meetings went online, it was folks who weren't mobile or who didn't have transportation for whatever reason, couldn't get to those meetings. I loved it when all the city council meetings and all that went online, because I could be observing from my home. Gathering feedback, deciding how to move forward without bringing people into the decision-making about next steps, hidden power. And we're going to talk more about that a little bit later as well.
How the census counts incarcerated people is a very sneaky thing. So if you're in jail, you don't get counted in the census according to where you actually live. Your physical body gets counted for the particular place that the prison is located in, and they're often in affluent.
So true.
Yeah,
folks who are convicted of a felony do not have the right to vote anymore.
Right.
Since the year 2000 in Massachusetts, that right to vote was stripped from folks convicted of a felony.
Bad.
So it wasn't always that way. It's just in our lifetime that changed. So yeah, that's a great example of hidden power, how they chose to count folks on the census, because that impacts how many representatives you get from that community. So yeah, great example. I mean, it's knowable, but not everyone knows it. It's sort of hidden. So yeah, did I miss anything that we want to lift up? I appreciate this. I hope y'all having fun with that annotate. I see lots of check marks at the top, but yeah, and the check mark next to who's allowed to public comment. Yeah, I like that you're getting into the stamp feature as well. Let's try the invisible power slide. I'm going to clear these while Eli moves us to the invisible power. So shaping meaning. You see this little drawing is a hint. There's like a puppet situation going on. How individuals think about their place in the decision-making, the impact of socialized roles and stereotypes. White supremacy culture. Yes, there's a great example. Pulling yourself up by the bootstraps theory. Yeah, this idea that anybody can do it, this illusion of a meritocracy. misogyny, ableist culture. Yeah, this is the one, this invisible power one is it's a tough one. Youth voice being dismissed. Yeah, not legal voting age. Local leaders can't rely on their immediate vote. Yeah, adultism. This invisible power of all that all adults have over children. Norms influencing behavior. Yes, that's invisible power. Whether people realize it or not, they're influenced by it. Absolutely. That's exactly what we're talking about. These are the norms, the things that we just assume. It's always been that way. This is how we do it. Renters seen as transient and less important than homeowners and businesses. Yes. That's why when I have friends who move to the city, I'm like, switch your voter registration ASAP. Stand up and be counted. Who gets to tell the story? Yeah. Who wrote the history book? Yes. Racism. Yes. Social capital. Yes. Advertising. Yes. Neurotypical people trying to force their way of being onto neurodivergent people. Yes. Overwork culture, that grind culture, that hustle and grind culture. Yeah. One of my favorite, I was thinking about this in preparation for this talk we're having. And I thought about invisible power, like the people, the power of the people is invisible power, but you have to make it visible. So I was thinking about like when the pandemic quarantine hit and folks couldn't go to work or they needed sick time and they banded together and they made their power visible, like frontline workers made their power visible. It was invisible. They didn't know they had it. And then they banded together and made it visible. And now all of a sudden, all these retailers are providing paid sick time and, some conditions improved a little bit for folks because they made their invisible power visible and fought for some rights. The social construct of time. Yeah, it's a big one. Rural versus urban dichotomy. Yeah, perception that rural parts of the state don't matter. Yes, fake news. Yes. This is great. Y'all are doing an amazing job teasing apart these different kinds of power. Any reflections, thoughts, or comments on these dimensions of power, visible, hidden, and invisible? Just want to make a little bit of space for folks. All right, well, we are about halfway there. So why don't we take a little break? Let's take 5, take 10. Let's take 10. Have a stretch, refill your coffee, get some water, look outside. Why don't we meet back here at 12:45? And you're going to need a pen and paper when you get back. So sometime on this break, grab a piece of paper, the back of a page, and a pen or pencil, because we're going to use that in our next activity. So see you at 12:45 with a pen and paper. For bringing us back. So welcome back, everyone. We are going to continue our talk about power. We're going to talk about how power is expressed. So I know folks have heard these 4 expressions of power before: power over, power with, power to, and power within. So we're going to just take a couple of minutes and break these down a little bit. Yeah, I think it's helpful to have an understanding of the types of expressions of power. They reinforce the notion that's not quite true, that those who hold less power in society are powerless, but actually, like someone said earlier, people have a lot more power than they think or than they know. So could I ask a volunteer to read the first bullet, the power over, and then the 2 lines below it?
I can read it.
Thank you.
Power over is seen as a win-lose kind of relationship. Having power involves taking it from someone else and then using it to dominate and prevent others from gaining it.
Yes, thank you, Ciara. Can folks think of examples of when power over is exerted? I mentioned one earlier. We talked about testifying at the town meeting and they mute your mic before you're done. That's definitely power over the public, you know, by muting their voice.
Recently, Massachusetts got into a little bit of hot water because drug court judges were like requiring people to go on medications that they didn't want to be on. So that is an example to me.
Yeah, exerting that power over, requiring folks to use medication-assisted treatment, even if they don't want to. Judges have power over, period. They do. Yeah.
I was thinking of in relation to dumping hazardous waste in a community that you quote unquote have power over, and that you don't tell them it's happening. You just kind of dump a bunch of stuff in their neighborhood and hope that it blows over.
Yeah. There's a lot of environmental stuff that folks are exerting power over. I'm thinking about like the pipelines getting laid down in West Roxbury. I think there was a power station in Weymouth that lots of folks were fighting, and it just kept getting pushed through. So good examples of power over. Can I ask a volunteer to read power with and the 3 lines after it?
I can read it.
Thank you, Ryan.
Power with is finding common cause among different interests and building collective strength based on mutual support, solidarity, and collaboration. It multiplies individual talents and knowledge through shared ideas and resources.
Yes, thank you. We love this one. Coalitions love this one, right? Power with. What are some examples of power with that y'all are familiar with? No one's going to raise their hand and say, my coalition. My coalition is an example of power with.
Neighborhood organizing.
Yeah, absolutely. Neighborhood organizing. I think all the mutual aid that popped up are good examples. Yes, it was right out of my mouth. Thank you, Ezekiel. Mutual aid, yeah. Power with communities identifying and solving challenges themselves. Like starting a childcare co-op would be an example of power with. When you bring folks to the table to figure out the priorities of the coalition work, figure out the priorities and, you know, the steps towards achieving them. It's all power with. Unions. Yes, unions. Thank you, Chelsea. I missed that, but I'm glad to see it. That's great. All right, power 2. Can I have a volunteer read power 2? Paige, you had your hand up. Were you volunteering to read? Maybe.
I mean, I wasn't, but I can. That's fine. I don't mind. Power 2 refers to the unique potential of every person to shape their life and world. Enforces that through even small actions, individuals have the power to make change.
What are some examples of power 2? One person making a big difference, or making a difference, or a big difference. Small actions can have big effects. Me, I love voting. I vote every chance I get. I'm a super voter. So for me, that's power 2. You know, I've got the power to vote. I've got the power to draw attention to where I live because they'll see who's voting in this neighborhood. Other examples?
Picking up litter, cleaning up the neighborhood. Really,
Yeah.
So many things. Yeah.
Absolutely. Picking up litter, one person can pick up a lot of litter. And then when they organize with their neighbors and, you know, get that power with going and do like a block neighborhood cleanup or something, it's an example from taking power 2 to power with and really making a change, driving a change. Great example, Margaret. Thank you.
I was a public librarian for 10 years. I'm just thinking of ways that, like, you know, we would often have policies that would try to prohibit the way people would use our spaces. But then, like, using my agency to kind of work around that when I could, like, for example, they really wanted to limit our how much time we devoted one-on-one to helping people at the computers. But you know, when you have people who don't have great computer literacy, but all job applications are online and they really need, you know, they'd come to me even asking me what their email is, right? I'm going to use my power to just be like, I'm going to spend the time with you that you need so that you have access to this information.
Absolutely. That's great. Using your discretion, power to help the folks who came there to use the services. I love that. Yes. Any grassroots organizing or protest? The first thing that popped into my head when I thought about one person making a big difference was Little Miss Flint. Little Miss Flint, who raised the issue of water in Flint, Michigan, and has just made a huge difference. She's like, I don't know how old she was, 8, 10. I wrote a letter to the president about the water in Flint. So good examples. I think, you know, folks have power too in our little worlds, our little positions, like Paige was saying. You know, if you have influence on hiring, then you can, you know, make a difference on decisions that are made in that space. Having power in the people you know, having power and influence. Yeah, thank you. One more new volunteer, someone whose voice we haven't heard perhaps, to read the last one, Power Within, and the 3 lines after it.
So I'm volunteering. Power within has to do with a person's sense of self-worth and self-knowledge. It includes an ability to recognize individual differences while respecting others, the capacity to imagine and have hope. It affirms to common human search for dignity and fulfillment.
Thank you. Power within ourselves. Folks have examples of using power within yourself.
Getting my service dog in training, folks. That was the most powerful thing I think my brain has ever done.
Very nice. You manifested it. You decided this is a thing that can happen. I'm the one who can make it happen. And you made it happen for yourself. Love that. Thank you for sharing that example. Any other examples of power within?
I don't know if this would be power within or power to, but I'm just thinking of the power of a person's privilege to be able to help others. It's kind of self-knowledge, but.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it takes some self-awareness, self-knowledge to recognize that privilege, but there's so many different ways we can use our privilege, and power to is a good example. You know, when I was hiring for a team of youth workers and they had a college degree requirement, and I didn't think you know, it wasn't necessary. You know, there's experience that would be equal to a degree, and wanted to hire someone from the community who didn't have a degree yet. And I was able to advocate for that and make that happen. So that was power too in my little world. And it was really a very successful person in that position. Power within to decide to rest, recharge, step back, especially in this work. Oh, and I love that. Thank you so much. Yes, power within, you know, the hustle and grind culture we talked about a little bit earlier, and that power we have within ourselves to say, no, I'm not going to check my email over the weekend, or, you know, no, I'm not going to, say yes to another thing. We have power within ourselves to guard our boundaries, like Chelsea said, and protect ourselves, protect our peace, have that self-respect, that dignity. I love that. Great examples.
I am a big language advocate, so power within language, being able to connect with folks at their, culturally, in a cultural approach, language, making sure they know it. This is my case. I speak Spanish and Portuguese being my native, but I've seen how in environments I am working at, when people realize that, and how I can And I'm not shy about that. If that's what is impeding you or blocking you to get the help or speak up, I'll be there. So power within, something
Beautiful.
inside of you.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for that example. That empowers you to have some expert power, a special talent or skill that you can use to advocate and to do good community work. And yeah, power within, self-advocate, resourceful. Thank you, Miriam. Great examples, coming up with. I think solidifying our awareness that power lies not just within ourselves, but when we come together and put our assets together collectively, we can accomplish a lot more. We can accomplish community goals. So that's what we're hoping to do, to enact systems change. And on our road there, we're going to pass it back to Winston so he can talk a little bit about power. What else? Maybe do some power mapping. Take it away, Winston.
Yeah, so we're going to do a power mapping exercise. And it's going to take us a little bit. The point of the activity is to sort of see where our coalition has its power placed and how that reflects ourselves as well as the community that is served, right? And it's about us really interrogating the power structures and the reflection of our community and the mission, which we discussed earlier. So if you have your pen and paper, or if you want to do it on your phone, or if Microsoft Word or Excel, when your computer works best, whatever you need, try to recreate this grid for yourself. And you're going to take 10 minutes and complete it to the best of your knowledge in your language for each. So those those 6 categories across the top: gender, age, race, education, ability, and class. And what is represented in your coalition leadership, your coalition members, the community you serve, and then yourself. So we're going to take 10 minutes. Eli, if you want to play some music, you can. If folks want to go off camera, they can as well. We'll come back in 10 minutes, and then we're going to go into small breakout groups and debrief what we've written down for our coalition.
Risk, I never thought it'd be this. I'm jumping out of your arms. I land and fall in a pit. Is this what they call the abyss? I fought and clawed for an inch, turning a miracle mile. I could recall when your lips used to contort into smiles. Bright as the sun that's drawn in eclipse. I haven't seen light in a while. Hasn't been bright in a while. Risk. Even days you mad at me. You don't wanna give me clarity. You're testament to your character. On your birthday, you told me to donate money to charity.
Linda, ability in class, ability meaning physical ability, class being sort of the categories of socioeconomic class. You can find that as you see. Physical and cognitive ability, not just physical.
Do the odds work in our favor, stay down, skate time, head low and face down like a kennel greyhound, doing God's work in the devil's playground. Risk, I never thought it'd be this. I'm jumping out of your arms. I land and fall in a pit. Is this what they call the abyss? I fought and clawed for an inch, turning a miracle mile. I could recall when your lips used to contort into smiles. Bright as the sun that's drawn in eclipse. I haven't seen light in a while. Hasn't been bright in a while. Risk. Wish you pick up on my calls. I've been going through withdrawals, trying to take the edge off. I need Novocaine. I've been trying to stand tall. I hope that you stand with me. You know all the greats fall. Shit is all the same. Hot as napalm. Next day, kinda rain. Gotta stay calm. Press play. Put my heart in all of these songs. Display all of these wrongs. Yeah, part of me is gone. And you are a gift in itself, a measure of wealth, the meaning of selfless. I place you over the shelf and hide in pedestals over the belt, the straddle the waist on Orion's constellation, observation of you. Here come the truth, I'm most overdue, stuck over you, I've gone under, living proof of God's wonders.
About 2 minutes left, everybody. About 2 minutes left.
I see the crystal raindrops fall, and the beauty of it all is when the sun comes shining through to make those rainbows in my mind. When I think of you sometime, and I want to spend some time with you, just the two of us. We can make it if we try. Just the two of us. Just the two of us. Just the two of us. Building castles in the sky. Just the two of us. You and I. We look for love, no time for tears. Wasted water's all that is, and it don't make no flowers grow. Good things might come to those who wait, but not for those who wait too late. We gotta go for all we know. just the two of us. We can make it if we try, just the two of us. Just the two of us. Just the two of us. Building them castles in the sky, just the two of us. You and I.
Okay, if we can get everyone to come back with their power maps. If you didn't quite complete it, that's okay. You'll have time to add context in your breakout groups. So we are going to break everyone up into small breakout groups, about 4 or 5 people in each. And in those breakout groups, as much as you're comfortable to share, I want you to discuss what you saw in your power map. We're also going to drop these 4 questions in the chat to sort of frame the thinking and the questions around the map that you just designed. Eli, if you jump ahead to the next slide, and we'll also throw these in the chat for everyone. So look at the demographic information. If it varies from the categories, are there any obvious power imbalances? What differences or similarities do you notice in the kinds of power that each stakeholder category has? Stakeholder categories being those on the left. What does that say about the power of the leadership versus the power of the community? And finally, how does this, if it does, how does it affect your work or relationship with power and with the stakeholders in each category? So they're here on the slide. They're also in the chat. You can go around in your breakout groups, discuss it for each of your power maps, and then collectively. And then we come back, we'll discuss as a larger group what we've seen and our thoughts on looking at the map versus our coalition. So Eli, if you put those, any questions before we go out, actually? No, looks like everyone's okay. All right. So Eli, whenever you're ready, we'll pull you out in the breakout groups. So before we go into our little debrief, we know a few people had to leave. So Eli is going to drop in the chat a feedback link that you all can complete in case you do have to leave a little early. You can just click it, open that window or that browser window on your computer, and then you can complete it later if you'd like. But just so everyone has it and we're able to get everyone's feedback in case folks do have to leave a little early. All right, so in our breakout groups, what did we discuss? What did we see in our maps, if anything? What were the discussions? Did we see any differences, any inequalities, any similarities, any surprises?
I can share a little bit. Sierra from the Charlestown Coalition. I talked a little bit about how the community of Charlestown here is so varied, where you have, you know, for example, extreme wealth and extreme poverty within the same block. And also talked about, you know, how the communities, different communities here, you know, there's multi-million-dollar condos, and then there's the largest public housing development in all of New England, right next to each other. So it's interesting to look at, I would say, like the coalition members versus the community. And I know we're always trying to center voices that may not have a seat at the table. And I think there is, you know, a tendency for the coalition members at least to be, you know, 40 plus, potentially white folks, primarily white folks, and kind of split education wise. We have some that hadn't finished high school and we have some that have master's degrees. So I see a lot of the like dichotomy when I look at this, which is really helpful, I think. And then when we look at, in terms of like coalition leadership, we're primarily made up of people of color, kind of a split age range, folks who have been doing this for decades and folks who are early career, primarily female, both in the coalition members and in the leadership. Whereas like in our community, it's fairly split. And I think all types of ages, and we often work with adults. But I think it's just interesting to lay this out because I think we're always having conversations about, you know, how we're approaching community members and how we're uplifting them and how we're helping them and what kind of lens we're coming from. So I just found this really helpful.
Did you see any differences, maybe to how power flows based on the breakdown of your community versus your leadership as well as your staff?
Yeah, so I would say, you know, in thinking of like leadership as our staff, I think we have a pretty good coverage in terms of people of color and different age ranges and different education levels that we bring to the table. But then when it comes to, you know, community members that really want to get involved, it's primarily affluent white folks who are coming to the table or trying to lend their voice, when in reality, you know, we're always trying to honor that and also seek out, you know, something that's more representative of different parts of the community.
Thank you, Sarah. Anyone else? To see a few folks off mute. So Jenny, Jesse. Anyone want to share? Saidi, I saw you come off mute.
Yes, but they came off of mute first, so I was gonna give them the chance.
I think Jenny and Jesse heard me say their name and immediately hit the mute button.
Okay. Sure. So I think my biggest surprise was so the things that were not surprises was race, class, education, gender, to say the least. But the biggest surprise for me was ability. So I work at a community health center, and when we talk about health in the city or in the county, we rarely talk about disabilities, whether visible or invisible. Most of the people in leadership and the members have no visible disabilities. And to my knowledge, no, at least leadership, no invisible ones. But most of the people we serve do have one or the other or both. And I don't see them enough. I don't think we see them enough at the spaces that we try to gather feedback from. And that's interesting to me, because how can one go about it, and how can one incorporate what they have to say and what their needs are into what we are doing is probably going to be a question that I'll ask somebody at some point.
Thank you, Saidi. Thank you. Yeah, ability often a category that is overlooked, right? Some assumptions are made. Thank you. Other folks, one or two more folks before we jump into the next piece. What was discussed in your group? Anything that you saw that was surprising? Anything that was confirmed? Anything that may be, you know, sort of sticking with you? Or another question, were there places of power in your coalition that were not included? I think it's leading. Oh, tell me if I'm wrong.
Close, yes, and thank you for trying. It's a lady, like a lady.
Sorry, thank you.
Hi, everyone. Our group, we basically spoke about the fact that in order to even engage the community, it's key to not have the expectation to have the community come to you, but rather you go to the community and meet them there. And that's something that we oftentimes, we don't mean it in a bad way, but that's oftentimes how the culture has pretty much set it up, that we have people come up to us in general as in society or in society's settings and structure, but making sure that you go meet the community where they're at is key. And not just asking for their voices, but also meeting them where they're at and gaining trust from them before having the expectation of them coming to you. Because if there is no trust, then that in itself is almost counterproductive to the work that you want to do, because then people, if they gain that trust and they feel a sense of safety, if they feel that sense of safety, then they feel that sense of, oh, you know what, there's hope. There's hope for solutions. There's hope for my life, or there's hope for other resources out there that they work, that they're not just doing the talk, they're actually doing the walk, because a lot of people have been historically disenfranchised, and we have to check the pulse of such before we impose, or before we even find solutions that we otherwise don't even know of, because again, as we know, we have to make sure that we are also meeting people where they're at before imposing, just in general.
Thank you, lady. Thank you. I think those are all great points. Going to the community, not making assumptions or dictating to people, but going to them. One more person before we move to the next piece. Anything that came up for you? One thing that comes up sometimes in this is thinking of places where we may not have listed it out in power, but do you have things like folks who are paid versus folks who may be unpaid in your coalition? You know, volunteers versus staff. All right.
Winston, I think something that was, I think that we all get reminded of all the time is just how hard this work is, and how meeting people where they're at requires a lot of work and time, and it's often doing things that funders don't necessarily see as valuable, you know, spending time in the community, you know, as well as doing things to make people feel welcome. And we also talked about, you know, having, you know, you have stakeholders who are doing these things as part of their job, and then you have other stakeholders who are coming from a job, and you know, people who are doing it part of their job, they want meetings during the day, and but you want things to be accessible to people from the community with voices of lived experience, and those meetings can't be during the day. They have to be in the evening. So it's a lot of work, but we're all in it together. So thanks for all the input from my group.
Thank you, Margaret. Thank you. So something as simple as scheduling the meetings, when are people's voices heard and how, in terms of leadership versus community and ourselves. All right, we're going into the last piece. Lauren's going to kind of bring it home for us. Lauren.
Thank you, Winston, and thank you everyone for your shares, for your digging into these concepts. So it's been great, and we are in the home stretch right now. So we're gonna put a slide back up. This is around leveraging power. So just some tips, I guess, for practices leveraging power across coalitions. So one of them, the top left, building shared knowledge and information, making sure that the knowledge or the information is accessible for everyone. I mean, anything from having the meeting notes accessible to folks who aren't able to be there, sharing out when there is information that folks need to know, informing folks, leveling the information power that we talked about back in the power bases, and also empowering folks to participate in every aspect that they're able to, because you don't hear, you know, actually you all are better at that, you know, you're experts, why don't you handle that and we'll do this. Building shared knowledge and information is a great way to leverage power in groups. Another one is modeling collaborative values and skills. So yes, modeling collaborative values and skills. So staying grounded in the purpose of the coalition, like that first question that we asked, why does your coalition exist? And having shared values around that, and sharing the skills, cross-training folks so that you can effectively collaborate. And then inevitably in every group of humans, there can be personality conflicts, there can be disagreements, but since we're all here for the same reason and we share values and achieving that goal, we can return back to that core value, to put that personal stuff aside and focus on the goal. I want to mention systems and structures. We want to focus on systems and structures to leverage power of the group. Simple things like rotating positions, This applies on coalition work, it applies everywhere there's a meeting in an office. Rotating, who's facilitating, who's taking notes, who's bringing snacks, who's cleaning up, who's setting up, all of those things. It should be rotated and not just the same, the usual folks who do it, or oftentimes places will fall into other sort of traditional roles for folks. Recruitment of new members, making sure that the location's accessible, that it's central, providing food and childcare if possible to enable members of the community who otherwise wouldn't be able to come if they are, I remember doing community meetings and in the youth development program, wanting to get parents to come, and it's time to pick up the kids, it's time to make dinner, all of the stuff. So we would have childcare and food available. So just come to the meeting, drop your kids off and grab some dinner and you can participate. So it's really important. Language interpretation, having multiple methods of participation for every kind of learner, really leaning into adult learning theory, systems and structures. And then, of course, there's different methods for effective communication. You set up norms like we did at the beginning of our training today. Although in the beginning of a group that's going to continue to meet, you'd build those norms together. If we had more time, we would have built them together. And using that oops and ouch feature can be helpful. One method of communication that I love to use in different spaces is using circle practice to facilitate discussions. I use a talking piece when facilitating discussions. So everyone is equal in that space and everyone is listening unless they're the one holding it. And there's other structures that I've heard about coalitions using, like sociocracy, which is circles, sort of dispatching different groups of folks and having representation. So just wanted to quickly provide those tips on leveraging power. If there's any thoughts or comments, I would welcome them before we move on to a continuum of community engagement that I think will be helpful. Since folks can now recognize where power is sitting, recognize your own power, understand the power structure, you're able to impact power dynamics. Christine, what do you want to add?
Just something very, very specific that I remember from my group counseling class in grad school. There was a scene where a Black man was trying to describe racism to this group of people, and it was so disturbing to me that in the footage of the group counseling session, a lot of the other members were attacking him for being an ineffective communicator, that you're too angry, you're too this, you're too that. And then my classmates proceeded to kind of fall into that same trope of like an angry expression must be ineffective, it must be bad, it must be toned down. So having society overall get more comfortable with expressions of anger that are justified, like, I'm sorry, like people get to yell at really unjust things. They get to have that anger, and there's an extent to which it becomes violent, destructive, and horrible. But if you're in group counseling and you're like maneuvering this, I don't know, it really struck me. It's like sat with me ever since, even if this was years ago.
Yeah, you make a good point. When we're asking the community for input, we have to be prepared for what they're going to bring, what kind of input they're going to bring, and meet them where they're at and really listen and trust their experience, without trying to police how it is expressed. So yeah, thanks for bringing that in. There's active listening skills that I think folks need to use so that when someone is feeling heard, when they're feeling like their voice is heard, they're less likely to use some of those angry expressions that you referenced. So why don't we go to the next slide, because I know we are really close to 2 o'clock and I want to introduce this continuum of community engagement. So really the goal, if we had more time, would be to think about certain aspects of your coalition work and where it falls on this continuum. And then does it need to be bumped up? Like, is it worthwhile to move from consultation to involvement or from involvement to collaboration? Not everything needs to be all the way up to the right on empower. There are some things that make sense to be on inform. But it's important to be self-reflective, self-critical about where we can bump it up. So the very first one there is inform. You can see from the little picture that's information's flowing in one direction. Stakeholders are getting information to assist them in understanding a problem. Here's what's happening. Here's why this coalition is coming together for whatever the reason, just sharing information. Now, the next step up would be consultation. This is when, you share the information. Now you want feedback. You want to hear the analysis, the decisions, the thoughts of the affected community. Here's some options. What do you think? Moving beyond that, bumping it up a little bit more is involvement. That's when information's flowing in two directions, working with stakeholders throughout the process, make sure that their concerns and aspirations are consistently understood. So instead of me defining the problem, let's really go into the folks who are affected and asking them, what ideas do you have about this challenge? Folks are going to bring stuff that I never thought of, because maybe I'm not directly affected by that issue. Then there's collaboration. I like that little drawing of arrows pointing between multiple sets of people, multiple dyads. So partnering with stakeholders in each aspect of the decision, from development to solution. So this is working together to solve the problem. And then finally, empowerment is shared leadership of community-led projects. So this is like the paid folks in the room stepping back, and the folks that are affected are really taking the lead. Final decision-making is at the community level. I think about, we do this continuum in youth development as well, and self-management is the peak. So empowerment is the peak on this one, where the community is really driving the driving force. So you care about the issue, you're leading the initiative, how can we support you? So that's a quick review of the continuum of community engagement. I wonder if anything jumps out to anyone where you're like, oh, at my coalition, we have this and we could bump it up to that. Anybody have examples or thoughts or reflections that you want to share related to that? I know we're bumping up on time, but I just want to offer that opportunity for reflection or thought on this particular continuum.
I would just like to reflect on the fact that when I think a lot of processes sometimes try to jump sometimes from inform to involve, or others, and just how some efforts don't seem to pan out because of not being able to engage others in general, maybe because they are skipping steps or whatever it is. Some of the information is definitely not flowing both directions before trying to get people to collaborate and get involved. And then sometimes in that respect, and I think this happens more in local politics, where they accuse everybody of being not engaged, and yet even with having the information, they don't consult the people, and then they expect the people to be involved and collaborate. But yeah.
Thank you. Folks are not engaged because they're not, coming to me on my terms to give me the information that I want from them. Yeah, it doesn't look how I think it should look. So, if they cared, they'd be at the meeting. Well, is the meeting accessible? Is it at a time people can come? Yeah, those are great examples. Skipping steps. I'm seeing in the chat participatory action research as an example. I'm seeing Anna requesting a part 2 of this training. Thank you, Anna. Please put that into your feedback form, requesting what kind of trainings you'd like to see in the future. We do look at those feedback forms very closely as we're figuring out our trainings for the Community Health Training Institutes. All right, well, it is 1:51, so we're 9 minutes away from our hard stop. I want to thank everyone for your participation. Maybe Eli can drop the feedback survey into the chat again. I want to plug the coalition database again, invite folks to register. Our next training is on June 14th. It's called Navigating Local Policy to Advance Community Change. And that's going to be led by the Massachusetts Public Health Association. So as folks are filling out their feedback survey, I welcome you to leave us a last thought or drop it in the chat. How are you going to leverage your power positively in your community? We've done a lot of talking about what kind of power exists, what's out there, the power we hold. So if anyone has any thoughts about how they might leverage their power positively in their community, just one thing, we would love to hear it. Service dog awareness. Thank you, Christine. Yeah, that power within and sharing it with folks so that they know that they have it too. Thanks, Linda. No worries. I'm assuming folks are filling out their feedback survey. Saidi says, asking about how we can incorporate people with various disabilities in our initiatives. Yeah, I appreciate that. I've learned over the years when planning a meeting for the public, letting folks know, if there are stairs to get into the space, if there's an elevator, what the accessibility features are of the space. If folks have sensitivity to smells like chemicals, asking folks not to wear fragrances in that space. Really thinking about all the different aspects that could affect a community member feeling comfortable in the space. Appreciate that. I welcome any other thoughts. You're welcome, Sadie. Appreciate you. Really, it's been great spending these last few hours with you all. You've been incredibly engaged in thinking through these different kinds of power with us. So we appreciate that. Feel free to come off mute and say ciao if you wish. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your day. Please fill out that feedback survey. Please update your info on our coalition database. Please sign up to Navigating Local Policy to advance community change with us. We've got just 2 more trainings left this training year. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Anna. Thanks, Paige. Thanks, Jesse. Thanks, Meg.